Does the biblical God truly advocate for life and morality as commonly believed? This question, provocative as it may be, lies at the heart of a debate that has raged for centuries. The biblical God is often portrayed as a champion of life, a beacon of morality, a divine figure who values every breath we take. But is this the full picture? Have we considered every verse, every chapter, every book within the Holy Bible? We've been taught that God is pro-life, that he cherishes each human being from the moment of conception. Yet, as we will soon discover, there are passages within the scriptures themselves that seem to contradict this belief. These verses depict a God who not only condones but commands acts of violence against the most vulnerable among us, children and pregnant women. So we find ourselves facing a conundrum, an uncomfortable truth that might shake the very foundations of our faith. Prepare to challenge your current understanding as we delve into biblical verses that suggest otherwise. Imagine a God commanding the slaughter of children. Is it possible? Let's look at the Bible. In the book of Hosea, chapter 13, verse 16, it's written, "Samaria shall become desolate, for she hath rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword, their infants shall be dashed in pieces, and their women with child shall be ripped up." It's a stark and harrowing image, one that poses direct challenges to contemporary conceptions of a loving and protective deity. Moving to the first book of Samuel, chapter 15, verse 3, "Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." Here, God's command is not only to defeat the Amalekites, but to annihilate them completely, sparing none, not even the most vulnerable. But what does this mean? In the context of the biblical narrative, these verses reflect a divine decree to punish those who rebel against God's authority. Yet it's impossible to ignore the visceral, unsettling imagery of children's lives being extinguished on divine command. It's crucial to remember that these verses are embedded in historical and cultural contexts that differ greatly from our own. The Bible is a complex tapestry of narratives, laws, poetry, and prophecy, all of which reflect the realities and beliefs of the times and societies in which they were written. Yet, even with this understanding, these verses remain challenging. They seem to contradict the image of a loving, merciful God and pose deep ethical questions about the value of life, the nature of divine justice, and the role of humans in enacting it. These verses suggest that the biblical God, far from being pro-life, even commands the murder of children. What about infanticide? Could the biblical God condone such acts? This question may seem shocking, yet it's one that arises when we delve deep into the biblical narratives. One prominent instance of infanticide in the Bible is found in Exodus, specifically verses 12:29 to 30. Here we see the final plague that God inflicted upon Egypt, the death of every firstborn, including infants. To understand this act, we must step back and appreciate the historical and theological context. The Pharaoh of Egypt had enslaved the Israelites for generations, refusing to let them go despite Moses' pleas and God's warnings. This act of divine retribution, harsh as it may seem, was the final blow that broke the Pharaoh's resistance and led to the Israelites' liberation. But let's be clear, this is not an attempt to justify or glorify infanticide. Instead, we are seeking to comprehend the complexities of a divine narrative that spans centuries and cultures, one that has been interpreted and reinterpreted countless times. The theological context is equally important. In the Old Testament, God is often depicted as a deity of justice, who punishes the wicked and rewards the righteous. The Egyptians' suffering, including the death of their firstborn, can be seen as a divine punishment for the Pharaoh's stubbornness and cruelty against the Israelites. However, this interpretation raises profound questions about collective guilt and innocence, about whether children can be held responsible for the sins of their parents. These questions challenge us to grapple with the moral implications of these biblical stories, to reflect on the nature of God, and to question our own understanding of justice and mercy. Again, we find biblical evidence of a God who does not shy away from the death of infants. But remember, these narratives are not simple, and their interpretation is far from straightforward. They are part of a larger, complex tapestry that continues to shape our understanding of God, morality, and the human condition. In a world where child abuse is abhorrent, could the biblical God advocate for it? Let's delve into this by examining a few instances in the Bible. Firstly, let's take a look at Judges 11 verses 30 to 39. Here we find the tragic tale of Jephthah, who makes a vow to the Lord to sacrifice whatever comes out of his house to greet him if he is victorious in battle. To his despair, his daughter is the first to greet him. He upholds his vow, leading to his daughter's untimely demise. Now, some argue that this was a self-imposed vow, not a direct command from God. Yet one must wonder, why would a God of love and righteousness not intervene to prevent such a horrific act? How can we reconcile this with the image of a pro-life God? Another instance is found in Isaiah 13 verses 15 to 18. Here, the prophet Isaiah prophesies the fall of Babylon, describing in explicit detail the horrors that will befall the city. These include the brutal murder of infants and the violation of women. This is a difficult passage to digest, as it seems to portray God as sanctioning and even advocating for acts of violence against the most vulnerable. Some may argue that this is merely metaphorical language, expressing the severity of Babylon's impending downfall, yet the explicitness of the language used does raise questions about the nature of God depicted in these texts. These passages paint a picture of a God who sanctions child abuse, a far cry from the pro-life advocate many perceive him to be. The debate on abortion is contentious, but what stance does the biblical God take? This question may surprise many, but there are indeed instances in the Bible that depict abortion. Let's delve into the book of Hosea, specifically chapter 9, verses 11 through 16. Here the prophet Hosea relays God's pronouncement of a curse on Ephraim, a name symbolizing the northern kingdom of Israel. The curse includes the statement, "Give them, O Lord, what wilt thou give? Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts." The language, though harsh, seems to suggest God's endorsement of something akin to abortion as a form of punishment. Another instance is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, verses 11 through 21. Here we encounter the ritual of the ordeal of the bitter water. In this ritual, a woman suspected of adultery is made to drink a concoction of bitter water. If the woman is guilty, the drink will cause her to miscarry, effectively terminating the pregnancy. This ritual, sanctioned by God, could be interpreted as an instance of abortion within a specific context. These verses, however, are not without their complexities. The context and meanings of these passages are hotly debated among scholars. Some argue that these instances are not endorsements of abortion as we understand it today, but rather specific divine judgments or symbolic expressions of divine wrath. Others contend that these passages reflect a worldview wherein life begins at birth, not conception, thus complicating modern pro-life versus pro-choice debates. It's crucial to remember that interpretations of these verses can vary widely, and the Bible is often read through the lens of cultural, historical, and personal perspectives. Therefore, what one sees as an endorsement of abortion, another might see as a divine judgment or symbolic language. Once again, the biblical God appears to advocate for actions that contradict the pro-life stance. But remember, interpretations are as diverse as the readers themselves, and these verses continue to foster deep, and often contentious, discussions about life, morality, and the nature of the divine. Challenging as it may be, the evidence presented cannot be ignored. We've walked through a journey that compels us to question long-held beliefs, shining a light on the darker corners of the Bible. We have revisited instances of child murder, where the hand of God was not one of mercy, but one of condemnation. We journeyed further into the shadows, unveiling the grim reality of infanticide, a practice seemingly condoned in the sacred scriptures. The exploration didn't stop there. We delved into the harsh realm of child abuse, uncovering verses that suggest a divine approval of such acts. Finally, we confronted the contentious issue of abortion, finding biblical instances where God's involvement in terminating pregnancies was evident. As we conclude, let's reflect on these revelations. The aim is not to incite controversy, but to encourage critical thinking and foster open dialogue. So, is the biblical God truly pro-life? The verses we've explored suggest a different narrative.